If you've ever looked at a pattern and thought, what does this all even mean? What are all these words and letters and abbreviations everywhere? Well, you're not alone. Crochet patterns use a mix of abbreviations, special formatting, which might seem very confusing at first. But don't worry, in today's video, I'm going to break it down for you. And I'm also going to help you avoid common mistakes so that you know you are crocheting with confidence next time you want to pick up your hook and your yarn to make something. This is part 3 of the 4-part YouTube crochet series that I've created to help anyone and everyone get started with crochet. There are timestamps available down below, so feel free to skip to whatever part of the video you have more interest in. At the end of every video, there's a practice exercise that I usually give. Crochet patterns use shorthand to make instructions easier to read, but it can seem like another language at first. Here are some of the abbreviations you see: SC, single crochet; HDC, half double crochet; DC, double crochet; TRC or TC, that's triple crochet; CH, chain; and SLST, slip stitch. A pattern may say CH21, insert hook in the second chain from hook, and CH20SC. It seems like I'm just saying gibberish. All I just said now just basically means you chain 21, then from the second chain from your hook, do a total of 20 single crochet for the rest of that row. That's just what I said. That all I just said, the SC, the CH, the 20, the 21, that's just basically what it means. Apart from the regular SC and DC, there's also the INC, which means increase; the DEC, which means decrease; then TOG, which is together, is also the same thing as decrease. So you could either see DEC meaning decrease or TOG meaning together. It just means you decreasing in a project. BBL, which means bubble, is a different kind of stitch using any of the above stitches that I touched in this video, and it creates this kind of bubble look when used. There's also SK. So SK usually follows a number. You could see SK2 or SK3. It means skip 2 or skip 3. For example, if you've done your last stitch and they say SK2, it means you have to skip the next 2 stitches and work on the 3rd stitch. So between your first and your last stitch, you're going to have 2 stitches that were not worked into. We also have MR, meaning magic ring. And you could see BLO or FLO. BLO means back loop only. In this video where I mentioned counting stitches, when you're counting stitches, you usually see a V. So in that V, the one closest to you is your front loop. So when you see FLO, it means you have to work in that loop only. That's front loop only. When you see BLO, means back loop only, which means you have to work in the loop farthest from you. Then R, when you see R, it means row. So R usually follows a number, so like R1, row 1; R2, row 2; R20, row 20. FO, which means fasten off. This usually at the end of your project, so you see FO and weaving ends, meaning fasten off and weaving your ends. I talked about this in my part 1, but I really cannot stress this enough. Counting your stitches is very important, because missing one stitch can ruin your entire project, or adding an extra stitch where it's not needed can also ruin your entire project, and it's very disheartening when you've gone really far in your project and you realize that, oh, I messed up the pattern in the beginning, that's why it's not coming out as it's supposed to. Keeping a good stitch count is one of the mistakes that people usually make when crocheting. If you have to learn how to do anything when crocheting, you have to really get perfect at counting, so you don't get constantly stressed about how the project is not coming out as you want it to be, or how things are just not going as it's supposed to be. Counting is important. There's no two way about it. You have to be constantly counting your stitches in order for you to know you have the correct amount of stitch per row or per section, so your project comes out where you want it to be and be happy with it, because who would not want to be happy with how their project turned out? I touched a bit on counting stitches in this video. You can check that one out to know not only how to do your basic crochet stitches, but also how to properly count your stitches. Skipping stitches. This happens when you don't insert your hook in the right place, especially at the edges. Crocheting at the edges is a really difficult thing, because most times the stitches at the edges are usually tight. There's a possibility of you skipping it, maybe you didn't see it, or forgetting that, okay, wait, there's a stitch at that end. When you skip crocheting at your edges, as you are progressing higher and higher, the amount of stitches you have per row is going to gradually reducing. For example, if in your first row you had 20 stitches, and when you are going on to the next row you forgot to crochet at the edge, you are now down by 1 stitch. You do the same again for the 3rd row, you are down by 2 stitches. And when you are crocheting in a square, that is not going to come out as it should be, because when you've reached the certain amount of row that you have to crochet, you find out that your project is going like this. That's not how you want it to be. You want it to be a square. So very, very careful when reaching the edge of your project, and always remember to crochet in those edges so your work comes out not only having straight edges but also having even edges. Just like we have skipping stitches, we also have adding extra stitches. And honestly, I would say like this usually happens when you're using some certain yarn fibers, like where the fibers are sticking out and it seems very fuzzy that you're not able to see where you're inserting your stitch into. Adding extra stitches can usually happen when crocheters walk into the same stitch twice without realizing it. It's not necessarily like any single time you do it is a bad thing. Some patterns do need you to walk twice into the same stitch. That is called an increase. But when you really don't need that, you are increasing the amount of stitches you need in your work. If your project requires you to have the same amount of stitches from the beginning to the end, if you do 20 stitches in the first row and when you reach the second row you accidentally walked into the same stitch twice, now you are going to have 21 stitches in that row. And if you keep going with that, you are gradually increasing the amount of stitches that you have in your work, and that can really, really affect how your work comes out when you're done with it. That is if you don't need an increase. When you do need an increase in your work, you also have to be conscious as to where you are inserting that increase. If you are a beginner, that means you've not really been crocheting for a very long time, so which means you have to be very conscious about these little things, because they can affect your project over time and you start to hate the hobby as a whole. Refer back to the pattern and also be making sure that what the pattern says is corresponding with what I am doing. Misreading abbreviations. Okay, now this is something that I've not really had a problem with. There are two types of terms that patterns could come into. There's the US term and there's the UK term. If you ask me why that is like that, I really do not know, and they are confusing. This is the difference between a UK and a US term. So when you're following a crochet pattern, you have to check if they use a UK or a US term, because they can greatly confuse you if you do not know which one is being used. For your practice project, I would say it's an achievement, because this is going to be your first project that you'll be making. I want you to go online and check for a free bookmark pattern. Anything you want to create, and I want you to follow the pattern as it is, making sure to remember everything I've told you regarding skipping stitches and adding stitches, or the difference between the US and the UK terms. Not a YouTube video, a written pattern, so you can be familiar with all the numerous abbreviations and the shorthand letters that are being used. I'll see you guys next week, where I'll give you guys some beginner friendly crochet projects that you can follow and create more projects. Bye.